Hi everybody, welcome to the fourth and final part for our workshop Selenium for Beginners. In this lecture, we will complete all of our agenda. You can see the agenda right here. The first one, we dealt with requirements and dependencies, how to install, and we introduced Webdriver. You can check this video out and it will be linked in the description down below. Also, in the second one, we've discovered what is web element, we interacted with it, and also we studied about locators of Selenium. And then we studied about TestNG, and also we were supposed to study in the previous lecture about how to make your code more reusable and how to design your architecture. Those two topics will be covered in the video today. Today we will study about those two topics that were missing. We'll add a report, it will be extent report. We'll study some advanced interaction with web pages, and we'll create our tests for our final project. So let's get started. Why do we even need to design our project architecture? In many forums that are dealing with Selenium, many automation developers are asking, why do we even need the infrastructure? What is an infrastructure, and why do we need to be architects? Doesn't architects are the one who design our buildings? First of all, it is a better practice to hold all of the Selenium related methods in a separate file or several files, and also a logical division between the tests and the actions that you perform via the Webdriver should be separated. It is a better practice, and it also will lead us to more code reusability. Always bear in mind that sometimes you work in a team, and in a team you need to share your knowledge with your team members. And if you won't have this logical division, it will be hard to maintain your code. Let's have a look on a certain diagram. By the way, if you want to have the full detail about this diagram, you can check out our lecture about page object model. On the left hand side, you can see the web pages. You can create methods that will deal specifically with the web page. For instance, here you can see the Gmail welcome page, and we'll create a method that will click on the account button or the sign in button. Also, we have other pages such as the create an account page. We will have a method or several methods to fill in the form, to click the next button. In this video, we will deal mainly with the sign in page. We'll have username, text field, and the next button, and etc. etc. Gmail can have several pages that will cover all the application. On the right hand side, by the way, you will have the tests, and in the tests we can have specific tests to a specific page, and those tests should call directly those methods that we defined in the pages. This is a very simplistic architecture of a project, and also we'll study today about how to add an infra package to our project, but our main motivation will be to divide the project by this. Another note is that we should take in consideration that if we work in a team, sometimes some of the team members are dealing mainly with writing tests and the others are dealing mainly with writing the infrastructure. So in this case, we would like to have this separation, that those that are responsible for writing the test won't have access to the infrastructure that is mainly dealing with the pages. So there we can have some maybe more advanced team members that can write the infrastructure, that can deal with the pages, that can have our utils in the infrastructure and everything. And the other team members can deal only with the test, and then in that way we can make our infrastructure more bulletproof. Let's go back to our code and we'll try to do it ourselves. So we went back to our project from the previous lectures in this workshop. As you can see, we have only the Java package and we don't have any sub packages. There is no logical division, or there is no logical order here. We just have some Java classes. Also, we had a test with main that is navigating to the Gmail sign-in page, and then we inserted the username and clicked next. So this is the basic test that we had in previous lectures, and now we'll try to break it down to make it more sophisticated and more reusable. So we'll start by clicking right click on the Java package, the main package, and then we'll create a new package that we'll call it pages. Here we have the main sign-in page. that you can find in the page object model lecture, which is not part of this series, but just the basics of it. Here you can see that we have the username field, we have the next button field, and we have two methods, one which will insert the username, and the other one will click on the next button. By the way, if we'll right click on the username field, we can see that we have the ID that we found over there. Yes, you can see here that the identifier ID can be located, and since it's an ID and we studied that the ID is the best locator that we can have, so we'll identify it by the ID. The same goes to the next button. We can also identify it by ID. The main take from this class is that those elements won't be identified in the test level. It will be only identified here in the Gmail sign-in page. And then when we'll call it via our test, we'll call it via our method. We'll also make those two variables private because we want to control whatever is happening to these elements when we call it from our test. Now we can create our test package. We'll right click on the Java main folder and then we'll click create package. By the way, before we'll start with the test packages, before we'll start with filling our test package, let's check out the second page that we have here. This is the Gmail welcome page. That from here we can click on sign in. We can click on create an account. We can click on sign in. We have other buttons, we have a title, so this page can be fully automated and we can write many tests for this page. So we'll just have this page as a placeholder. If you want to see some more about it, you can check out the page object model lecture, but we won't deal with this in this lecture. We'll drag this page to our pages package, and we already have two pages, the sign in and the welcome page. Now we'll create our first test. We'll right click on tests and then we'll choose, and then we'll type Gmail sign in tests. We'll add the TestNG annotation. This is the test annotation. We'll call it public void valid login, or maybe valid Gmail login. That way our test name will be more clear. Now the first thing that we'll need to do is to call our Gmail sign-in page as an object. So we'll define this object, we'll give it a name, we'll call it Gmail sign-in page with a lowercase Gmail, G letter, and then we'll say new Gmail sign-in page. Of course, we need to define the Webdriver. So we'll start by defining the Webdriver as a private member of this class. By the way, we can define a before method that will run before each test in this class, and it will be responsible to our setup. Now in this setup, we'll initialize the Chrome driver, and now every time a test is being called, a new instance of Chrome will be initialized and we can start fresh in our tests. By the way, just as a concept, this is not the correct way to write it down, but you should be aware that in a setup, let's say that we are running our test in a CI/CD environment such as Jenkins, and we can get a parameter from the user or from an automated build. So then we can define this parameter here, And in the setup, whenever we receive this parameter, we can initialize the correct web browser. Another take on this before method, we can create a base test class. Let's say that the before method will be reused in any test class that we'll create from now on. So maybe it's a better practice to take one step back and to define the initialization of the Webdriver in a parent class. So this class will be the base test. Now we can copy the before method here and the Webdriver. And now our Gmail sign-in test class will extend the base test. So it will inherit all of its methods and members, and now this code can be reused. We can define the WebDriver variable as protected, so the child of this base test can use it. And of course, because base test is just a concept and it does not represent any page in our application, this class should be abstract because there is no meaning of creating an instance of this class. Also, in our base test class, we can include an after method, which will be tear down, and after each test, we can say that we'll try to identify if the test was failed or passed, and on failure, we can take a screenshot, for instance, and we can write to our report, we can write to the logger. So it's very useful to have this tear down method. And then we can close our WebDriver. We can think about other stuff that we want to do in the teardown method, but for now, I think this will be enough. By using an after method, we can make sure that whenever our test will finish, it doesn't matter if it was finished because due to normal execution or that we had an exception or something bad happened in our test, we can be rest assured that the after method will be called. Then we can do some manipulation, we can close the reporter or whatever that we want to do. Okay, now we'll start by navigating to this page. And as you can see, we have navigated to the Gmail sign-in page and we've succeeded in inserting our email. Now we need to identify the password field. So here you can see we have the ID, which is called password, and also we have a name of this field, and this name is also called password. So we can use either one of them. In this case, we'll choose to use the name. We'll go back to our page object, and we will define password field, and the name will be password. We also need to identify the next button of the password field. You can see here that its ID is password next. We'll call it password next button. We'll identify it by ID, and the ID would be password next. Now we need to create two methods to handle those two, the password field and the password next button. Under the insert username, we'll define the insert password. It will be very similar to the insert username method. Now we'll choose driver, find element, password field, dot send keys. So we'll copy, click on next button, and we'll call it click on password next button. Now we'll call the Gmail sign-in page, we'll insert a password. Now we can click on password next button. We'll try to execute the test. Hopefully it will run correctly. So we started, and then we already failed. Let's check out the fail message. As you can see here, we have an unable to locate element, and this is because you can see that if we click on the next button, it takes time for the next step to load. So we need to have some wait here. So between the click on next button and the insert password, we'll need to have a component that will wait before we'll start interacting with the password field. So let's go back to the slides. Waits in Selenium are a very useful tool, and we can also use waits in order to fulfill a certain condition before interacting with it. There are two types of built-in waits in Selenium, the implicit and the explicit wait. Implicit wait is used less commonly, so we won't deal with it today, but explicit wait is much more useful because we can accept a certain condition before throwing an exception. For instance, we can wait for an element to be clickable or for an element to be visible, and in this case, we can use either one of them. So the explicit wait can be easily defined by initializing a new object of Webdriver wait. We need to provide a parameter of the Webdriver and also a timeout in seconds. And then we can say wait until a certain condition will be fulfilled. So now let's try to add this wait to our project. We'll define Webdriver wait. We'll call it wait. New Webdriver wait will provide the driver. And let's say that we provide a 10 seconds timeout in the worst case scenario in order to wait for the element. By the way, a hard-coded wait is not so useful because let's say that tomorrow we want to change the timeout to be 20 seconds or 7 seconds or whatever. It's not a good practice to have it hard-coded. So in this case, I suggest that we'll start a new package in our project. We'll call it infra. And here we can define a timers class. In this timers class, we can define a timeout to wait for element. We can say it will take max 10 seconds. And then we can refer to this parameter via the Webdriver wait. So let's say that tomorrow our boss tells us that this wait is not enough because it takes for the elements because our application is so slow and it usually takes more than 10 seconds for the elements to load, so we can just change it immediately and we don't need to deal with changing all of these lines in all of our tests. So let's say that, as we said before, it's not a good practice to include all of the reference to Selenium in our tests. We want to have this logical separation. So we want to take this wait and to create a method that will do the same wait here. So let's copy that and we'll go back to the Gmail sign-in page. Let's create a new method that we'll call it wait for password field. Now our class will be the moderator, and we won't deal with Selenium directly from our test. Beside the fact that it is more logical to do it that way, there are some other implications that we won't deal with that here, but I can give you an idea that let's say that you want the wait method to do some other stuff, or maybe you want to catch the exception and to return a Boolean value instead of just throwing an exception, you can do it via this method, and then different tests can use it differently that way. So we can run it now, and we can see that everything is working properly because we've added the wait. In my opinion, the main disadvantage of using the Selenium built-in wait is the exceptions that it might throw. Usually, my philosophy when writing tests is to catch all the exceptions and to make my test fail only on assertions and not on other stuff such as exceptions, because exception can be unexpected. I prefer to catch all the exceptions before they occur, and then I can return a value. A Boolean value is always a good practice. Other values are also valid as well. And then let's say that if we wanted to see if the wait has succeeded or not, and then we can decide in our test level, because different tests can have different implications of the same method. So we'll deal with this wait by a different approach. Here you can see that we have implemented a wait that we call it rain the dog wait. This is a very useful wait for an element without throwing an exception. Then you can get a Boolean value in return. It has some disadvantages, or such as we don't have the expected condition of a wait for element to be clickable, but we can use it in a very useful way, and I do prefer to use that over the Selenium wait. You can find a link to this lecture here, and if you would like to dig more into it, please check it out. Now, before we'll continue with writing our test, I want to take a pause and present a concept that can make our code more reusable. In this slide, you can see an example of an insert text method, which takes the basic functionality of the send keys of Selenium, and then it wraps it up with an ability to return the value of the text after insertion. What do I mean by that? The basic send keys of Selenium doesn't return a value if the action was successful or not. What is the success when you insert a text? Let's say that I'm inserting my username to the username field. I want to make sure that this action was successful, so I can read the text from this field and to return if the text is matching the text that I initially insert there. You can also find a lecture about the insert text method linked here. So let's try to add this one as well. If you would like to go a bit deeper about it and you don't understand exactly why we use this insert text, please click on the link to this video that you just see appearing on the screen. We'll define a new class which we'll call base page. This base page will be the parent of all the pages, and here we can deal with method that deals directly with Selenium and doesn't refer to a certain page. Those are like general methods. This is the same concept as we used in our base test class. So let's say that we'll define the insert text method. Now we can have the element and we can have the text to insert. We can send the keys, and then we can get the text after. And then we can return the comparison between the text to insert and the text to after. Now let's edit our insert username method. Now it will return a Boolean value since it will call the parent, which is located in the base page class. Now we can call this method in our test. Now we can add a result which will be a Boolean value to the insert username method in our test, and then we can assert it. We'll say assert true, and in the case that this action won't be successful, we can say username field has failed. Or maybe insert username field has failed. Let's debug it, because I think that maybe the get text is not suitable here. So let's check it out before we run it. So we'll debug it, and then we'll step into the insert text in our base page. And as you can see, the text after is empty, but the text does appear there. So in this case, because it's an element that the text was inserted to the input field, the text appears as a value and not as a text of the element. So if we'll get the attribute value, we'll get the text. So we can edit this method now. Let's say if the text after is empty, we'll try to grab the text by referring to its value. So we have here now a fallback. If the get text won't work, we can get the attribute value. So now this method can be useful for several fields. It doesn't matter if the element will return the text and in the get text method, or by an attribute returning the value of it. So now let's run it. And as you can see, everything was working, but since I already inserted several times the wrong password, now Gmail is giving me the CAPTCHA. The main take from here is that you can see by wrapping the Selenium, you can extend its capabilities and make it much more reusable. Before we'll continue with the Actions class, let's complete our test. Now I'll insert the correct password. So if we run the test now, we could say that we have reached the inbox. And in order to complete the test that we've presented in the first meeting, we need to mouse over the message that we want, and then we'll have this delete icon, like the bin icon, and we need to click on it. So first we need to identify this grid that is representing the table of the messages, and then we need to identify the text that we want to delete, the text of the message that we want to delete, and we'll mouse over it, and then we'll click the delete button. So let's define a new page. We'll call it inbox page. This page will also extend the base page. So we'll start by creating a by element for the table. And this is the idea that I found. We'll start by identifying the table. Then we'll create the method delete message by text. We need to add the Webdriver as we've added in the previous pages, and we'll also define the constructor. I'll do it a bit differently. Instead of using the by, I'll use the annotation find by of page factory. If you don't understand the page factory, because I want to use the adject element locator factory, I do encourage you to check out our lecture, which deals directly with Ajax element locator factory. Now we can wait for the inbox to be loaded before we start dealing with it. Now our method will have a for each loop, which will take all of the rows. Now we'll find the elements by referring to the table element. So the table element is our base element, And then we're trying to locate all of its sub-elements. Those sub-elements are the rows of the table. Now we can deal with the actions class. The actions in Selenium is a special class that is dealing with keyboard and mouse interactions. So if you ever want to imitate, let's say, a keyboard press, such as holding the control button and then clicking the shift and another button, or pressing down enter, or whatever you want, you need to use the actions class. So now let's create in our base page a new method. We'll call it mouse over. We'll pass the parameter of the Webdriver. We'll pass the parameter of the element as well. By the way, it is a better practice to have a constructor in base page which will hold the Webdriver instead of passing it. But just for simplicity reasons, I haven't included that here. Now we can refer in our method to our super, which is the base page, and then we can provide the driver and the row. So here, this for each loop, iterating over the table, and every time it will check if the text that we desire is being contained in the row text. If it's being contained there, we'll mouse over it, and then we'll click the delete button. By the way, I haven't included the find element of the row in the page object because we are trying to activate it as a sub element on the row itself. Now we can add the Gmail sign-in page. And here we'll look for a message which will contain the text greetings. Now we can store the return value from the delete message by ID in a result. And we can assert in case that the deletion won't be successful. Let's debug it now. Now we'll iterate over it, and then we'll have the row text. We can see greeting from Rain. So this greetings text appears in the message, the snippet of the message that we see here. So we can mouse over it, and then we can delete this button. Now you can see, by the way, that the mouse over is working. I'll try to put it side by side for you to see. Yeah, I'll reevaluate it. Now you can see that the delete icon has returned. Now this one was clicked. Now we're returning the result. Since it was successful, the result value is true and the assertion has passed. Now, in order to make our project complete, we need to have some nice looking report. I do recommend for you guys to use the extent report, which is an open source reporting library. You can also buy the full version of it, and it's easily integrated with major testing frameworks such as JUnit, NUnit, and TestNG. In order to add the extent report, first we need to add the Maven dependency. After we'll add the Maven dependency, we need to start the report with those lines. First, we need to create the report itself. Then we need to create the Spark. You can, by the way, check the documentation in the extent report website that will be linked in the description down below. And then you need to provide the path to the report. Then you will attach the report to our report object. And for each test, we'll need to create a new test case. By referring to the report, create the test with the name of the test. In order to write to the report, then you need to call the test object, and you can say pass for a pass step. You can mark it as info. You can take screenshot. By the way, we won't deal with taking screenshot in this lecture, but you can find the link to the take screenshot lecture. It will appear on the screen. By the way, please remember to do flush after you complete all of your tests. That way the report would be written. So I'll copy from the slide all of those initialization of the element. By the way, I do believe that the valid Gmail login test shouldn't include the initialization of the report. It's better to externalize it to the base test. That way we can use the same report for all of the tests that we are running currently. But for simplicity reasons, I included it here, but as I said, it's a better practice to move it to the base test. Now let's say that after that we'll wait for the password field, we'll tell the test that this step has passed. Of course, we can write to the report after each of the steps. And let's say that if not result, we'll write to the report, we'll write to the test, fail, so it will be marked in red. By the way, the extent is marking the pass with green, the fail with red, and the info with blue. And in the end, we need to flush it. By flushing the report, we are writing the report to our file system. So let's right click on it and run it. Now we'll log in. We will see the greeting message. We'll mouse over it. We'll delete it. And now our test will pass. You can see that the test has passed. Let's open this folder of the test output. Let's look for the test report HTML. We'll open it in our browser. Now you can see the extent report. It has only one step because our test has passed, and this is the only step that we reported to the report. You can see that we have the timestamp, the details, and etc. and etc. Also, you can see that we have the statistics, we have graphs, and the execution time. We have search. Extent report is really nice and easy to use. I highly recommend you to check it out. Of course, you can add a screenshot to the extent report and everything. You can find the documentation in its website. But I recommend you guys to start by just adding the basics of it. Then you'll play with it a bit and then you'll succeed. And after you play with it a bit, you'll be able to make it more complex. In this slide, you can see all the information about our final test. You have it step by step. You can look at it as an exercise. You need to design a project according to the architecture that we've discussed. You can create the base page, and then you'll add the test annotation, you'll add the assertion, and of course you can add the extent report support. That's it for now, guys. I hope that you have enjoyed this workshop and you found it useful. If you like this lecture and you want to see some more, please subscribe to our channel. We release videos every week, and if you'll subscribe and hit the bell icon, you'll be notified whenever we release a new video. Also, please share your thoughts in the comment section down below. You can check us out in Facebook and LinkedIn. I hope to see you soon, and have a great day. Bye.